session the opportunity to participate in this discussion. As you might have gathered from that intro, I'm not an American historian. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I have to admit, as a Texas parent and a Texas resident, the issues that we're discussing have an urgency, significance, and immediacy that go well beyond merely academic interest. And I'm happy to see these issues receiving scholarly attention. In considering textbook content, I'll approach this from the perspective of the opportunities that standards-based education gives to shape textbooks. And so I'll focus on the Texas Social Studies Standards debate. Former State Board of Education member and sometimes chair Don McElroy recently gave a speech to the St. Louis Tea Party Coalition. The speech was titled, "Teaching Our Children What It Means to Be an American in 2011, question mark, exclamation point. The greatest problem facing America today, McElroy said, is that we have forgotten what it means to be an American." What does it mean to be American? McElroy's speech makes his own position clear, and it is the same as the position of the majority bloc of the State Board of Education. Apparently, being American means being a Christian, and in particular, a politically, socially, and theologically conservative Protestant of the sort that dominates the religious right. In their view, the Founding Fathers intended America to be a distinctively Christian nation, and America should return to its Christian heritage. Now, I want to be very clear as I talk about this, that I am not trying to generalize about religious people in general, Christians in general, conservative Protestants in general. I'm talking about a very specific political ideology and theology that a certain group holds. If you read the documents associated with the social studies revision process in Texas, this ideology comes through very clearly. This is the ideology that the social studies standards are intended to promote. So it shapes the approach in the new Texas social studies standards to local documents, governments, and notable individuals of the early colonial period, for example. Christian Americanists, shorthand for this ideology, rightly point to the explicitly religious content in many of the early colonial documents. Absolutely accurate. But they misstep when they draw a straight line from the Mayflower Compact to the other early colonial documents, all the way to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and say all of these documents form a trajectory pointing towards an explicitly Christian national government. Consider, for example, references in the standards to the Reverend Thomas Hooker and the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, 1639. The State Board of Education appointed expert reviewer David Martin, who is a professional political activist, argued, when Reverend Hooker established Connecticut, Hooker delivered a sermon based on Deuteronomy and Exodus. This sermon argued that the electorate appoints officials and determines the limits of power of those officials. Therefore, in Martin's logic, the Bible inspired the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. And the Bible inspired the idea that citizens appoint their leaders. Now, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut are fundamental knowledge for Texas students for that reason. This ideology also determined many of the names and facts and dates that students would be required or recommended to learn. Some of the expert review reports for the board emphasized that many Founding Fathers were devout Christians whose theological views informed their political views and work. This, however, is why the standards emphasize awareness of the motivations of Founding Fathers. The motivations there specifically are Christian theological motivations. If a given Founding Father ever said something positive about religion in general or Christianity in particular, it is highly likely that his name is in the standards. And it's always a he. Founding Fathers whose motivation came from other areas are much less likely to be mentioned. So So, for example, there are very many good reasons to learn about John Adams. But the one that seems to explain why he's in the Texas Standards is that he once said religion and morality are the only foundations for government. Founding fathers, of course, were very educated men. They were very familiar with the scripture. Many of them were deeply religious. You're an audience of American historians. You know all this. But for proponents of Christian America, this serves as proof that America was founded on biblical principles. Now, how do people with this ideology reconcile this belief with the First Amendment? By arguing that the original intent of the First Amendment was only to prohibit the establishment of a national state church. In their view, separation of church and state is a drastic misinterpretation of founders' intentions. The standards do refer to separation of church and state, but in a surprising way. Students are to, quote, examine the reasons the Founding Fathers protected religious freedom in America and guaranteed its free exercise, and compare and contrast this to the phrase, separation of church and state. Now, Board Member McElroy, former board member, told the Tea Partyers that the board specifically included the phrase separation of church and state so that our children will know that it is not in the Constitution, he said. What we have in the Constitution in America, McElroy reasoned, is not the separation of church and state. What we have is its establishment of religion. David Bradley, another board member, put it even more bluntly. I reject the notion by the left of a constitutional separation of church and state. I have $1,000 for the charity of your choice, if you can find it in the Constitution. He still has his $1,000. Terms federalism, separation of powers, and checks and balances are also not in the Constitution, although the standards did identify them as constitutional concepts. Now, I recognize that historians and constitutional scholars debate the original intent of the First Amendment, and that this establishment is a legitimate view in that debate. My critique here is not that students are exposed to debate, but to the contrary. The intention of the standards is to close off debate by excluding from consideration the views of the Virginia fathers like Madison and Jefferson. Depending on what actually does end up in textbooks, high school students may study the First Amendment in a way that dismisses the historical importance of separationist interpretations. Social studies courses have long been an important site for struggle for the nature of American identity. That's definitely the case with the Texas History Wars. The majority bloc on the board relied on contentious historical arguments to promote a construction of American identity as distinctly Christian and of a distinctive type of Christian after that. The new Texas Standards misrepresent American history for the purpose of promoting one set of contemporary religious beliefs above all others. Teaching our students misinformation will make it harder in the future for citizens to engage in the thoughtful deliberation